So what were my top 10 fiction books of 2021? I'm going to do a top 10. These are all books I read for the first time in 2021. There were 3 really good rereads, which I'll mention, any of which I think all of which might have made the top 10 if I was reading them for the first time. So they were, and I haven't got the books for them, Guards by Terry Pratchett. Funny, clever, deep, emotionally intense and engaging. Dune by Frank Herbert, which is just is visionary. It's got amazing world building of this far future situation, and it's got really interesting techniques for presenting character. And The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which I actually have shelved up here, by Agatha Christie, which is probably her best, having reread it. Also her most controversial when it was first published. Agatha Christie is great and is well worth the time of people. I mean, there's a lot more going on than here's a puzzle, solve it. That said, I have a top 10. I have 9 books. I can't find one of them. I think I've lent it to someone, but we'll see if it turns up. And we will start. I think we'll start from number 10, go up to number 1. A lot of these are clumped together, so I wouldn't really say it's like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. It's more like the bottom third, the middle third, the top third, number 1. You know, that kind of thing almost. But I'll go 10 to 1 anyway. I have sorted them. So first, let's do some Fafnir and the Grey Mauser, Book of Lankmar by Fritz Lieber. Particularly in this case, this is the first book of Lankmar, which is one of the omnibuses, which has 4 of the fix-up novels or novellas, however you want to think of them. And I'm going to pick Swords in the Mist, which is book 3. If I have to select one, I will pick that one. I think it's one which has one of the most interesting mixtures. Swords Against Death, which is book 2, is really interesting and has like some of the most archetypal Fritz Lieber stories, Fafnir and the Grey Mauser. But 3, Swords in the Mist, just has some really interesting odd ones, like When the Sea King's Away and The Wrong Branch and the kind of longish early classic Adept's Gambit. So one of those 2, Swords Against Death, Swords in the Mist, and I'll probably say Swords in the Mist. If you want some good, adventurous, funny, quite heartwarming at times classic fantasy, I'd recommend it. Number 9, I reviewed this recently, Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, book 1 in the Mars trilogy. Hard sci-fi, Arthur C. Clarke-esque in terms of near future hard sci-fi particularly. But what makes this not just really interesting hard sci-fi, but a really interesting great book is how good the character work is. The first settlers on Mars in 2027 land there, and you get long in-depth point of view parts of multiple chapters from individual eyes, individual heads, however you want to put it. And it's a really slow burn, really thoughtful, reflective and measured approach. Very different to other modern masters of character as we see it, people like Joe Abercrombie, but also very similar in terms of being so good at capturing a point of view. So I recommend it for hard sci-fi and character work. Number 8, Lord of the Hollow Dark by Russell Kirk. I think I have reviews probably for every one of these books, or at least a discussion of them at some point. Lord of the Hollow Dark by Russell Kirk. The last of his 3 novels. He wrote 2 ghost story novels, 1 kind of related novel that connects into the rest of his universe. Wrote lots of short stories. This was the 3rd of his novels. One of the late ones of his works. Only a few short stories came after this, and this is really the pinnacle of his imaginative universe, building together lots of things he'd been working on over the years, over the decades, and really the second half of the 20th century's master of the ghost story, loved by Ray Bradbury and Madeleine L'Engle. Moral and thoughtful, and in that sense very much the themes of the ghost story are moral reflection, and also sometimes quite scary in the set. And I don't mean because you jump, I mean because there's just emotionally and almost existentially intense things going on, and this book is great for that. It's a flawed book. It's actually one of the ones of this top 10 which I'd be like, structurally or pacing, maybe not so sure, but what's good in it is so good that as long as you go in knowing that you're going to have to let him deal with things at his pace rather than yours, you'll enjoy this a lot. Number 7, Sword of Rhiannon. Number 7, Sword of Rhiannon by Lee Brackett. Cosmic Peril in a Lost World. a man on modern Mars, modern in the far future Mars, gets transported back in time to ancient Mars. So these two Marses we don't know anything about. It's such an interesting concept. Oh yeah, no, our hero's on modern Mars. It's decayed and dry. The canals are the only source of water. You know, very much that image of Mars. It's not Cassini. It's one of the other explorers, isn't it? Pre-explorer, basically, Mars image. And then he goes back in the past to when Mars is a fertile world. It's a really interesting concept. But more than that, its characters are interesting, its setting is well built, it's adventurous, it's pacey. This version, which is a first paperback print from 1953, it was also, I think, at the same time in a 2-book bind up with a book by someone else. But yeah, this is 121 pages. It was 40 cents, which, I mean, I don't know how inflation has hit since then. Is that like $8 million? But yeah, it's a great book. It's easy to read. That's the big thing I'd say is, if you're thinking, can I read some classic fantasy or sci-fi, and this is technically sci-fi, that has interesting world building, interesting magic, interesting character perspective, and that's quick, and then if I hate, at least it's going to be over soon. Try this one. Number 6. I don't have number 6. That's one I can't find. Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskill. The one classic, I think, on this list. Cranford is like a Jane Austen novel, but with old ladies. It's about a small, quiet village in Cheshire, and our character, our point of view character, Elizabeth Gaskill, basically, or a fictional version of. It's set just before the time it's published. It was published in the 1860s in Charles Dickens' magazine, and it's maybe set in the 1840s, I think. And she goes occasionally out to this village of Cranford, where everyone knows everyone's business. Where it's an ageing town on the whole, where there's a lot of kind of, you think of small town pettiness, but it turns out that there's just so much love and so much care and so much humanity. And the plot arcs are, because it was episodic, the plot arcs are not mostly particularly dramatic and big. Some are bigger than others, but they're important and they matter to real people. They're people we meet and we care about. And I think it's got the wit and the humanity and the insight of Austen, and it's actually written well. Some of the long 18th, 19th century fiction is technically functional, with its strengths coming at otherwise than its central technique. Gaskill is a good writer, so I recommend that. And I think, for my money, it's probably to my taste more than her other stories. Number 5, The Grey King, Book 4 of the Dark is Rising sequence. I have a Why You Should Read the Dark is Rising sequence, and I have a review of the first book, I think, in this series, which is Under Sea, Under Stone. The Grey King, it's a very good series in general. Book 5 is strong, but maybe just squibs its coda, its epilogue, but other than that is very good. The other 4 books are all very, very good. The first and second books you can start with either, and they each have very different styles and atmospheres. This is really a summation as plot threads from across the series are drawn together. This is a summation of many of the strengths of earlier books. Low level background dread. It's this, by this point you're talking about really a YA book, an early YA book. The other ones are maybe middle grade, the earlier ones. But low level dread, kind of worry about things happening in the background. You don't know what's going to happen next. And also just weird invention, lots of crazy fantasy stuff, often in quite quick succession. That's the style. And yeah, I think the cover sums up a lot about the atmosphere. It's a white fox on a burning rock, modern Earth. So yeah, that's by Susan Cooper. Number 4, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So technically this is the best ghost story I read this year, beating out Lord of the Hollow Dark. It's not as kind of broad-rangingly interesting as Lord of the Hollow Dark, but it is virtually perfect. It is a novella, basically, and it's so well-structured and formed. There are a couple of odd Dickensian moments. If you've read Dickens, he is the opposite to Gaskill in terms of his ideas of structure and technique. But it's so well done, so well executed, and so readable as well. It has aged very well in terms of its style. And so, yeah, I love the characters. I love the descriptive abilities that Dickens always shows. I love the open sentimental moralism. You know, even when I'm like, is that a bit over the top? I still enjoy it. It's still effective, and it works all these years later. 150 years later, or whatever it is, 160. So number 4, A Christmas Carol. Number 3, Neuromancer by William Gibson, the first in the Sprawl trilogy or Neuromancer trilogy. Really seen by most people as a standalone, as in I think most people understand it as a standalone, not like people hate the rest. The rest of the series is quite well rated too. Really nice cover on this edition. There are important historical things. This is the series, the general set of books where he invents the words like cyberspace and the Matrix. That's not really why it's interesting, except in so much as cyberpunk, this is an important point, by the way, about how people use these terms sometimes. Cyberpunk and steampunk are dystopic visions. The punk is a sort of World of Darkness, the role-playing games, does it with the idea of gothic punk. There's an image and an aesthetic that's really attractive, but then there's this deep rot and a need for rebellion against it. That's the punk. So this is cyberpunk in the sense that it shows the potential of technology, both VR, AI, and indeed other things. But as it says, part thriller, part warning, it's pretty grim about some of the human consequences of what is a wonderful and interesting thing in terms of what the book shows us is fascinating and amazing and exciting, particularly as the weird mystery plot unveils as the main character tries to find out why he's even been hired to do this weird hacking job that he's doing. But the human consequences of those weird and wonderful and interesting things are quite significant and are not to be discounted. And I think, in that sense, it's not just a good novel and well accomplished, but it's also obviously prophetic. Number 2, Roger Zelazny, Lord of Light. This is sci-fi, though it seems to be on a planet where people are Hindu gods or something. This is... In terms of I read the Amber Chronicles too, the first Chronicles of Amber this year, which is 5 novellas or short novels by Zelazny. And these, between them, the first Chronicles and Lord of Light, would generally be considered his best books. Some people much prefer, to be fair, his short stories. But Lord of Light is such an interesting book about the nature of religion and the ways in which, why it matters to people, how it affects people. And also just how has the colonization of another planet become a reenactment of Eastern religion and mythology, is a question that is answered really interestingly in terms of sci-fi imagination and speculation. But it has a moral core, it has a vision of humanity at the centre of it, which is really interesting. And structurally, it's really interesting and well done as well. It does time jumps, basically. It's quite happy to say these things happen some way apart, and I think the way it does that is very clever. So at all those levels, that was my second best of the year. It's interesting looking at this list. I think the of the top 10, 5 are sci-fi, which, I mean, I read much more fantasy than sci-fi this year, but obviously the sci-fi I read was spot on. The final one on this list, number 1, is again sci-fi, one of those 5 sci-fi, and I'm cheating, this is 2 novels, or short novels anyway, in one. The Book of the New Sun, Volume 1. Nowadays it generally is released as 2 books, so this is Volume 1, which consists of originally 2 novels, Shadow of the Torturer and Claw of the Conciliator. This is by Gene Wolfe. It is mad, and I've done both a show with Liam at Liam's Lyceum about this, a spoiler discussion, and I've done a review of this. And this is, along with Dune and Guards, maybe Neuromancer as well, this is the book that has left me thinking most this year. I still think about it. Mostly, it's baffling, not in the sense that I'm like, I don't understand what happened, that's not very good, I'm really confused, but rather like, I understand enough to realise that there is an insane narrator with a seemingly very good memory, but a memory which nonetheless gets affected by point 1, the insanity, quite a lot. So there's this narrative where you just don't know. I was wondering, are the people he's describing the people he says they are? Not as in, are they pretending to be someone else, as in, does he even understand what's happening? And that Wolf pulls it off, and that you understand as the reader enough about that dilemma in this kind of dying Earth setting where things are decrepit and weird and crazy and alien, and our hero is a torturer exiled, and he seems to understand so much, and he seems to get so much, but he also just is. You get confused and you realise at first you think maybe this world's just crazy, and then eventually, maybe people do weird stuff, and they do seem to do weird stuff, but eventually you realise no, I think I'm experiencing his completely disjointed and tortured view of the world, and that's incredibly powerful achievement. I don't think I've ever read a book that is quite so good at capturing a point of view of a character of a particular mindset. It's also fascinating world building. It has some really wonderfully moving parts, as Severian is. The points where he is impacted by human contact and real sincere relationship are very powerful. So yeah, no, I love the Book of the New Sun. I'm going to read volume 2 in the new year. I'm likely to go on to other books in the universe, which aren't sequels generally. They will have very different feels, but I trust Gene Wolfe from the 2 books of his I've read enough that I can see myself going beyond Book of the New Sun volume 2. I'll read that in the new year. From every word I've ever heard about it, I don't think it fails to stick the landing. People think it does, and so I'm really excited. Those are my top 10 books. In fact, they were my top 13 books because I added in my 3 big rereads. What were your top books of the year? Is there anything that's going to come in under the wire in the next few days? I have one novel I think I will finish in the next couple of days. It's not going to make the top 10. It's good, it's not amazing. But yeah, tell me in the comments what your top 10 were. And if you want to, I'm not going to do a bottom 10. I didn't read many bad books or anything. But tell me what your worst books were as well, if you like. Till next time.